The San Antonio Spurs will pick first in the 1987 NBA Draft. The San Antonio Spurs select David Robinson.
The San Antonio Spurs select Tim Duncan.
Ward to a Kenny's freeway. He's underneath. Trying to backhand. The San Antonio Spurs have won their first NBA championship.
The San Antonio Spurs are your world champions.
And for the third time in 7 seasons, the San Antonio Spurs are the NBA champions.
The San Antonio Spurs are NBA champions once again. San Antonio is back on top once again. The Spurs are the 2014 NBA champions.
With the first pick in the 2023 NBA Draft, the San Antonio Spurs select Victor Wembanyama from Nanterre, France.
Greeny, Victor Wembanyama is the singular greatest prospect in NBA draft history.
Because top 20 is Kevin Durant. If he's Kevin Durant, if he's Hakeem Olajuwon, he has not met expectations.
Okay. What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Victor Wembanyama might just be the greatest prospect in NBA history, but does he have what it takes to live up to the historic franchise that is the San Antonio Spurs? Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to get right into things here today. So obviously, if you guys couldn't tell by the title and thumbnail, today we are going to be talking about Victor Wembanyama. The former number 1 overall pick at this point, the most recent number 1 overall pick, however you want to put it, just drafted this last offseason to the San Antonio Spurs. And, I mean, he has limitless potential, right? Obviously, your typical questions of, you know, a big man at that height, especially being drafted that high at such a slim frame. How will his body hold up? Really, I mean, the biggest question is, can he stay healthy? And is that frame really going to affect him in the NBA, right? Now, we saw him play a couple summer league games here this offseason in Vegas, where we saw him play 2 games. His first game was not very good. Despite what everybody says, yes, he played okay defensively, but you're not really looking for defense in summer league. It was a pretty bad game. It was a pretty bad first game. But his second game, he had a much better game. He averaged 18 points over the 2 games, shot 40% from the field, 30% from 3 on 5 attempts a game, which is to note with the fact that he's like 7'4". Shot about 68% from the line, got 4 blocks per game and half a steal per game to go with 3 turnovers as well. So my take on Victor Wembanyama, which I'll get out of the way initially before we kind of dive into what I think he can do for the rest of the season, how I think his career will project, and really kind of how this team is built around him now and how it could be built around him in the future, is I think you had to go with him number 1. I'm a big Scoot Henderson fan. I really think he's going to be a top tier guy as well. But just with the potential, right? That's the perfect word for it. That Victor has is you had to take him number 1. If he actualizes, right? If that potential actualizes, then yeah, he'll probably be the best player in the league, and he could be a top 10 player in NBA history. But I think to expect that out of him is not only insane, but just rude to the kid, right? It doesn't even give him an opportunity to become his own NBA player. It's kind of absurd, the expectations that the media has put on him, essentially saying that if he isn't LeBron, then he's a failure. And LeBron James is, at worst, in any argument, the second best player of all time. Maybe if you talk to somebody that's like 85 years old and hasn't watched basketball in the last 20 years, they're not going to put him in an argument, you know what I mean? But like LeBron James is, at like bare minimum, the second best player of all time. And for Victor Wembanyama to quote unquote have to live up to what LeBron James did is insane, because LeBron James living up to what he did is insane, right? There's no way that LeBron should have lived up to the hype that he had, which essentially was to be the next Michael Jordan, right? which is exactly what he did. He became the GOAT of the next generation, right? That's simply put. And to expect Victor to do that exact same thing, first off, I think was like, it's insane that LeBron had those expectations. Now, obviously, he lived up to them. But I don't think it's fair to him, and I don't think it's realistic because, I mean, when you look at number one picks, even just over the last few years, I think Zion had pretty close hype that Wemby has. Now, Wemby has a little bit more international hype than Zion ever had. But Zion's been riddled with injuries throughout his career, and his thing was he is the most athletic prospect we have ever seen, right? Then you go to DeAndre Ayton as another former number one overall pick recently. Well, he's supposed to be the best center in the class, who is an absolute athletic freak and can do it on both sides. Okay, he's giving you 18 a game right now, and he doesn't shoot the ball as much as he should, right? I mean, you can even go to Cade, who another one of my guys, like Zion, Cade. I really liked them coming out. And Cade, yeah, he had some injuries this last season. But it looks like he'll, be a superstar in this league. But it's not like he's gonna be LeBron, right? Now, I don't think Cade had that same level of hype that a Wemby or a Zion had. But you get my point. Like, number one picks, there's the potential. That's why they're drafted number one. They show stuff before the league, and they have some athletic tools, and their IQ, really, their IQ is never something you think about when you're drafting number one. At least it seems that way. Now, like, if they were doing something wild, like off the court, then that would bring into more question. And, Brandon Miller, the second pick, in this last draft, to the Charlotte Hornets, kind of showed some of that. And so that's probably part of the reason why he never would have gotten in the number one race. Yet I think Scoot did have some buzz for it, right? And so I don't know. I think expectations on prospects are already too high as they are, and Victor's are beyond that, right? But to get into what I think he can do with this team this year, this team was bad. This team was really, really bad last year, right? Obviously trading away DeJounte and such, this team didn't really have a star player. Now, you had Keldon Johnson, who I like as a player. I think he has star potential. He could make 1 or 2 All-Star games, right? He's really developed super, super well. Averaged 22 points per game last year. That's probably closer towards the peak of what he'll average in his career. I don't see him becoming a 25-point per game scorer or something like that. And a lot of that was somebody on this team had to score. But I do think he's a good player. He can play offense. He can play defense. He can shoot the ball. And he's going to be a good complementary piece to Victor. Beyond that, with some other young guys, we saw Jeremy Shohan last year. He had his rookie year, and he averaged 11 points per game. Obviously, the big thing with him that I think actually draw a lot of interest from people outside of the Spurs, which you don't typically see a lot of media attention put on the Spurs, was, him constantly changing his hair color and such, which I guess, you might tune into a Spurs game, say in like, I don't know, October, November, something like that. And then by the time that like January, February came around, it was like, oh, he's got new hair color. You know what I mean? So it was kind of one of those things every time you did catch a Spurs game. It was just interesting to be like, oh, what's his hair color now? You know what I mean? But yeah, he was a 9th overall pick for him the last year. Had a decent rookie season. We'll see how he develops. I think he has some potential. But beyond that, I don't know if he has like superstar potential or anything like that. But he could definitely get in a similar realm as Keldon Johnson, I believe. Then there's Devin Vassell, right there, shooter. We know what he is. He's a 3-point shooter, averaged 18.5 points per game last year on 38% from 3, the 11th overall pick from the 2020 draft. Still only 22 years old. He's about to turn 23, so happy early birthday to you, Devin. And he's shown very, very good progression so far in his career. His 3-point splits have always been pretty38 his rookie year. He was 34%, up to 36 his sophomore season, and 38 this last year, as I said. Now he only played 38 games this last season. So hopefully he plays more this year. And yeah, I think he's going to be a very good role player for this team. Again, not necessarily one of those guys that I look at to be a star, but again, I think he can get in the same realm as a Keldon Johnson or a Jeremy Sohan. So that's 3 guys that are potential one-time, we'll call them one-time, 2-time All-Star players, right? And then Malachi Branham also was drafted in 2022. He was the 20th pick in that draft. And last year in his rookie season, we saw him average 10 points per game, 40% from the field, and 30% from 3. Yeah, I mean, we'll see what he develops into. I think he has potential as a 2-way player. Beyond that, I mean, that's the majority of your young guys on this roster, right? All of them, I think, do show good promises, which I think is pretty typical for Spurs young players. Being coached by the greatest coach of all time definitely helps with your development. And I think, to tie that back into Vic, it should help with his development, right? If there was a place for him to go, it was San Antonio, right? Now, in all reality, right, it's more likely that Victor doesn't actualize his talent. It is more likely that he is not a top 3 player, top 10 player all time than that he is, right? That's just pure statistics. It's more likely that he's not. Had he gone anywhere else, I would have said it's almost a guarantee he doesn't actualize his potential. Because the other teams that were floating around for that number 1 pick were Charlotte. We know Charlotte is just a burning franchise right now with no success in sight. The Trailblazers right there, right? We know, I think that would have probably been the second best situation for him to play with Damian Lillard. Because I would have assumed that Dame would have stayed at that point, or the pick would have been traded. That would have been interesting to see. They probably would have drafted Wemby and just traded Dame, though, if Dame wanted them to trade the pick in that instance, I guess. But yeah, I think that Trailblazers would have been the second best. They've shown competence as an organization to be a playoff team, but beyond that, not really. And then you would have been able to play with at least a similar level of young talent that the Spurs have as well, because the Blazers have been accumulating that over the last couple of years. And then the last team would have been the Rockets, where obviously we know they have tons of young talent, but it's also been a dumpster fire of an organization the last few years. Now, we'll see how they can progress this next season. I actually do want to kind of do one of these more longer form, really deep dive looks at their roster and such, so that might be coming up here pretty soon. But yeah, I mean, this was the spot. If Victor's gonna be who he's supposed to be, or be who he's meant to be, however you want to phrase that, if he's gonna, reach his potential, the Spurs were the spot for him to go. And I think that should be a unanimous sentiment across all NBA fans. If we're actually going to see him become what he's supposed to be, it'll be with San Antonio. You know what I mean? And so with that said, do I think he'll be a top 10 player all time? I would bet no. I would bet quite a bit of money he will not be a top 10 player all time. Does that mean that he can't win a championship with the Spurs? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are plenty of people that are not top 10 players that can win a championship with their team. I mean, it's basketball, right? Even just look at the Heat, and nobody considers Jimmy Butler anywhere near a top 10 player. But how many times has he gotten the Heat to the finals, right? And so some of that just comes with you just got to get shooting at the right time. And I think Vic has the potential to be better than a Jimmy Butler, which is a crazy thing that's a disrespectful statement, right? But Jimmy Butler's made the finals multiple times with his team, you know what I mean? Victor Wembanyama, as much as he's had success overseas and everything, the NBA is just a different game. The NBA is just a different game. Now, would I lean more towards him being a top 10 player in today's game? Yeah, I think he can get to that. Again, I'm very concerned about his health and his ability to truly play the 5 at the NBA level. We've already seen him get bullied around by smaller players because he doesn't have the size. I know I saw an interview of him where he said he's also not really worried about the size. He's more worried about, making sure he has that agility, which is why he can be such a good perimeter defender, and that does benefit him in that sense. But truly at 7'4", yes, you should want to be able to defend the perimeter, but your primary focus should be being able to not get backed down by a 6'8" player, right? And so his ability to truly play the 5 at the next level, I think, is a big question mark. Now, if he's a 4, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, I mean, he's just like Giannis and Embiid. I mean, we've had the memes all year of once Vic gets to the NBA, Giannis and Embiid are just going to thrash him, right? Thrash him, not demolish him, not destroy him, thrash him. They're going to brutally annihilate him inside the paint because he's not going to be able to deal with their strength. Now, even with that said, he may recover occasionally and he may get some highlight blocks on some top players because as much as they push him away, he still has the arm span to just reach up and block the ball before it gets to the basket, right? Which I think, is one of those plus factors. But truly, I think if he doesn't fill out his frame and if he doesn't stay healthy, then yeah, he won't reach his potential. Now, health, it's one of those things where it's just not something you wish upon somebody and something that's completely unpredictable pretty much, other than showing signs. Victor hasn't shown any signs yet. He hasn't had foot injuries, hasn't had knee injuries up to this point, and so that's something very good and a very good thing that we can kind of look at and hope that he doesn't have health injuries, right? Because I'm all for it. If he can be one of the most electrifying players to watch in basketball, why would I say no to that? Why would I say no to that? Whereas like you look at like Greg Oden. Apparently I can't talk today. If you look at Greg Oden, he already had knee issues. He had actually different sized legs because of his knee issues and such. Or that's really what led to his knee issues. But he had prior stuff before he ever entered the NBA. When you want to look at a really major bust from a number one pick big man in the last 20 years, that's your number one guy. And that's because he already had signs that would happen, right? Now, again, I wish all health upon Wemby, but if I had to bet, it's more likely he doesn't reach his potential than not. With that said, this team might be able to make the playoffs this year. Again, they have the greatest coach of all time in Greg Popovich. Something I just found out when I was looking up is he actually coached for the Warriors for 2 years. So, started his assistant coaching career with the Spurs in 1988 and has coached with them all the way up until now, other than 2 years, which was his last 2 assistant years before he got the head coaching job in San Antonio. He has a 65% win rate in his career. I mean, we know what he is. He's the greatest coach of all time, already inducted into the Hall of Fame and still getting new contracts. Just got paid this offseason. So shout out to Greg Popovich for that. And sorry, I was going to parlay that into the rest of the team. But yeah, this team also has some decent role players. It's got good veteran presence, decent role players that should be able to help this team push toward a play-in spot. If Victor is a Rookie of the Year candidate, and I mean, if he comes into the league and he doesn't seem to struggle, if he can play just as well as he played when he was overseas, he might be an All-Star his first year in the league. Like, he truly could be the next rookie to make the All-Star team, be the first rookie to make the All-Star team since Blake Griffin. That's the type of player we're looking at with Vic. And so you combine that with those young players that we already listed, and the veterans like Doug McDermott, Devontae Graham, Reggie Bullock, Zach Collins, Kem Birch, Jetty Osman, and Cam Payne. This team isn't a bad team. Like, there's much worse teams in the league. Charlotte Hornets. That, like, had he gone there, there would have probably been no chance that they made the playoffs, even in the East for the Hornets. But this team has decent veteran presence, guys that have been around the league can, fill their roles and such, along with other young talent that'll continue to develop with Vic. And then, alongside that great coaching, that only shows a recipe for success. Now, obviously, Doug McDermott is going to be like your shooter of the bunch. Devontae Graham as well. Though his shooting percentage isn't always great, but he can shoot. It was 35% last year, so that's pretty good on 4.6 attempts a game. He's actually dropped his volume quite a bit since he played in Charlotte. He averaged almost 10 threes a game 1 year in Charlotte. But yeah, Devontae Graham as well as a more ball handler. I assume he'll be in a lot of pick and roll action with Vic when he's on the court. Reggie Bullock, another shooter. Zach Collins is a solid, somewhat young big. At this point, he's about to be 26, so not necessarily young anymore, but a solid veteran. He's been in the league for a few years. Last season for the Spurs, he averaged 11 points per game, his best season by far of his career. He also averaged about 6 rebounds per game and almost a block per game. So again, solid player. I think he'll be good for them. He showed more with the Spurs this last season than he had really throughout the rest of his career. And so that's good to see. If Vic can't play the 5, he's not going to be a bad option for them there. And that's something to keep in mind. Beyond that, we also have Khem Birch, another center. He's kind of bounced around the league a little bit, but he's been solid wherever he's been. He's 30 years old now. He'll be 31 this year. He only averaged 2 points last year in Toronto, but he's averaged upwards of 11 points in his career. Solid setter. He's a little bit shorter at 6'9". I think he plays closer to 6'10". He might be 6'10". He's listed at 6'9", but yeah, I mean, another solid rotation center if you need him, which is good because, like I said, if Vic's going to be forced to play the 4, then it's good to have those other options at the 5. Cedi Osman, we know, has been a solid contributor to the Cavaliers over the last few years. Last year averaging 8 points per game, averaging a high of 13 in his second year in the league. Now pushing 28 years old. And again, I think he'll be another solid veteran guy that will fit well in the Spurs system and fit well next to Vic. And then probably the biggest addition that they had this offseason outside of Victor Wembanyama is Cameron Payne, who we saw them trade for from the Spurs. And I mean, Reggie Bullock is up there as well because him and Doug McDermott do provide just a different element of shooting. But Cameron Payne, I think, is probably the biggest acquisition other than Vic. He will be turning 29 here in a couple days, actually, so happy early birthday to you as well, Cam. And yeah, I mean, he's been a solid player for his whole career, all the way back in the days where, you know, he had the warm-up routine with Russell Westbrook, all the way to when he was, you know, helping the Phoenix Suns make the NBA Finals, right? He's been a solid player. He's on a decent deal for himself. He averaged about 10 points per game last year, and if you need him to run the starting point guard position, you can. Speaking of point guards, I totally did not mention Tre Jones. They also have him as well. I don't know why he is not listed on here. Let me try to pull up his stats for last season. But yeah, I totally forgot to mention Tre Jones. He is, again, another one of those young players that probably doesn't quite have that potential that a Vassell, Jeremy Shohan, or Keldon Johnson has to be an All-Star. I don't think he'll ever be an All-Star in his career. But I do think Tre Jones is going to be a solid player for them this next season and should provide, again, some more point guard presence. That really, besides Cameron Payne, is kind of all they have on the roster because Devontae Graham, he can't really run the point like that. He's definitely more of a 2, even though he's point guard size. He just doesn't quite have the chops for playmaking that the other two do. Not that necessarily Cameron Payne's a fantastic playmaker, but he averaged 4 assists last year. He's a solid playmaker. And then I think Tre Jones is by far their best playmaker on the roster. He averaged 6 assists last year, 12 points and 3 rebounds on 45% from the field and 28% from 3. He's, you know, since being a second round pick, he's really carved out a space for himself with this team, showed good progression, going from 2 points to 6 points to almost 13 points per game in his 3 years in the league. And yeah, another one of those guys that I think will be a key component for this team. Should be their starting point guard with Cameron Payne off the bench. And I think will work well with Victor Wembanyama and will fit well in the system as he has, right? Beyond that, though, that's really the team. That's really kind of what you're rocking with. I think this team's ceiling is probably a play-in. The West is very, very stacked. So if they're back towards the top of the lottery, don't be shocked. But this team, I want to say, what did they win last year? 20 games? Around that. Let's see here. I want to say they only won like 20 games last season. Yeah, they finished 22-60. It was their 3rd worst season in franchise history. I expect that to go up. They should be well over 30. Probably, I would bet between 32 and 44 games. It all depends how much of an immediate impact Vic can make. I know I'd find it very hard for them to get past 37, but I would put their range up to like 42 at 500. Above 500, because 41 and 41 is 500. So just above 500 would be their peak. I'd bet their max is a little closer to 37 though. And more likely, I'd expect this team, if I had to put a number on it, to finish with about 35 wins this year, be back in the lottery around the 10th to 12th pick, get another guy, and then kind of see how year 2 and year 3 Vic develop from there. But beyond that, I mean, Victor Wembanyama, to really wrap it up, has the potential to be one of the greatest players of all time, or one of the most historic busts of all time. And so that's really just going to come down to, you know, how his development goes. With that said, let me know what you guys think about this team. How well do you think they'll do? Do you think they are a lock for the play-in or playoffs? Or do you think Victor Wembanyama is just going to not be good in the NBA? Do you think he'll be a bust and this team will be hunting for another number 1 pick this next season? Let me know what you guys think. Appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch you on next time. Peace out, guys.
I think it's a great city. I think they got the best organization in the NBA, but they do have some big old women down there. I mean, come on now.
See what you do to him every time you go down.
I'm telling you, man. They be whooping them children.
None of those.